Chapter 10. Max was ready, all of his reeds and chemicals in the blue. Until the Berserker went into battle, Ellis was finished running programs. Maintenance was truly a push-button job, no skill required unless something went wrong. Ellis slid behind his console and sat for a moment, thinking about his conversation with Catherine Lara. In particular, what she'd said about the company. Everyone knew there was corruption in the corporate sector. It was a given. But Weyland-Yutani was one of the biggest conglomerates there was, much too well established to be involved in anything as insane as slavery. Convicted felons as unwilling interface victims. Ridiculous. On the other hand, a conspiratorial voice whispered to him. If they were involved in something like that, who would know? Ellis considered it. The company did have half the government in its pocket, and the news media had long been brought and contracted. Realistically speaking, Weyland-Yutani's programming board could easily cover a few missing felons. Ellis snorted and looked over at the giant Max, asleep and quiet behind the dirty window. Great theory, except for the man inside the machine. The second he got out, he would call the UFDA and file one hell of a lawsuit. Think bigger. Why let him out at all? Ellis blinked, then shook himself at the disturbing thought. The company wasn't perfect, but that kind of illegal and immoral operation simply couldn't exist. Someone would talk. And Lara couldn't have seriously considered it either. Or she wouldn't have taken this job. He flipped on the shipwide and tapped into the ship's video system, calling up an image of the station they approached on his monitor. Calling DS Terminal 949 and repeat. Are you receiving me? Over. Lara sounded frustrated. Had they picked up on the hailers? Pop. The others waited in briefing. SOP. Negative, said Lara. They got to be offline. Ellis tuned her out as she started hailing again and studied the DS service terminal, hanging like a giant cross against blackness and distant stars. The vertical extension was cylindrical, he knew, layered with floors of equipment and living quarters, and the crossbar was actually 4 docking bays, set at right angles. A deep space docker usually housed at least a few hundred people full-time, accommodations for twice that in ship's crews. Even this far out, the station looked massive. No sign of life, said Pop. Lara sighed. Let's run a visual, she said. Formalities over, the Nemesis picked up speed and cruised in for a closer look. Ellis heard a low whistle over shipwide. Apparently the ground team was watching from the briefing room. This is one big motherfucker, Pop. If bugs wipe them out, we are talking major infestation. That was Jess. When Pulaski spoke, Ellis could hear the grin in his voice. Major bug guts, right? If Teep was there, he said nothing. The point man hadn't really looked too healthy at mess earlier, paler than ever and not talking too much. Ellis looked over at the equally silent Max and suddenly wondered why there were 2 technicians on board Nemesis, but no doctor. The Candyman was psyched. This was going to be the biggest blowout he'd ever been involved in, if this place was bugged. The station loomed closer on the video screen, the stars gradually blocked out by the massive panels of riveted metals and plasticrete. It was so big, he couldn't think of anything good to compare it to. The best he could come up with was that if the Nemesis was a flea, the station was the size of a big dog. Shepherd, maybe. He and Jess sat on the edge of the flat-screen table in front of the monitor, Teep behind them in one of the bolted chairs as they waited for confirmation. So far, it looked like something was fucked up, no 2 ways about it. Nobody was answering the hailers, no system reach, no nothing. I can see acid burn damage on the lower hull, said Lara over the shipwide. 5 o'clock. Pulaski searched the screen and spotted the dark smear of corrupted metal. Ooh yeah, 949 had a problem all right. Check that shit out, big time, he said, and Jess rolled his eyes. Pulaski grinned and pulled a chocolate bar out of his pouch. It was a new kind, with hazelnut cream. Pop had laid in a wide variety, which was aces with Candyman. He tore into the candy and wondered how it was that Jess and Teep didn't get so excited about the heat. Well, Jess anyway. Teep had a shit job. It wasn't just killing things, it was about power, strength. It was about watching shit explode and knowing it was making things safer for civilians. Man, nothing felt better. Except Sheila, maybe, when she does that thing with her hips. Pulaski smiled and ate another chunk, thinking about his wife's hips. Pop's gruff voice interrupted. "Close in on 2-7, Lara. See that?" Jess reached forward and tapped the controls in the close briefing room, not even having to stand to feed in the angle. Their screen now showed a brightly lit biodome, a recreational. Pulaski had heard about them, first class all the way. A whole forest of tropical environment, complete with water and animals and a full-wall observation deck. Only the ritziest of stations had anything like that. As the camera zoomed in, they could see trees and shrubbery against the thick plexi. The artificial sun lamps still burned brightly, the first actual light they'd seen on the silent station. "Those things run on a separate system from the rest of the station," said Lara softly. "Maybe the people are..." She cut herself off as they all saw it. A black flash of movement against the full sunlight. A sliding thin body that skittered through the tropical flora. The shadow of a long and sloping skull lunged across the screen. A silent clatter of limbs and spiny tail behind it. It was gone in another flash, as if it had never been. "We got a live one, people. We're coming down to talk," said Pop. Pulaski pushed himself off the table and grinned at no one in particular, feeling good. Another chance to do his civic duty and get one step closer to his woman. His only goals in life these days. Getting arrested and going through trial had been worth something after all. He had focus, he had power, he had a sexy wife to dream about, and access to military weaponry. If there was more to life, he didn't give a shit. Terminal 949 has a staff of 400 and can cater for the same number of stopover or transfer passengers. It carries full warehousing, medical and recreational facilities. In addition, it's capable of servicing and repairing up to 4 Galaxy-class vessels at once, including ship's crews that could be close on 1,000 people. Lara watched the team digest the information, staring down at the simple layout on the flat screen. Pop continued, the harsh reflected light from the table making him look almost angry. "Last outside contact with the station was going on 2 weeks, routine monthly report. We were diverted because a freighter that docked there 9 days ago sent a message to its next destination, stating that one of the maintenance doors had been barricaded and they were going to investigate further. No word since, and now we know why." Jess raised his eyebrows at Pop. "We also know there's no way we're equipped for this. Get onto Griggs and tell him you're going to need support." "Let's not jump the gun, Jess. We need to take a look-see first. Lara." She adjusted the picture on the flat screen, wishing it was more detailed. "This is the outline plan for a typical deep space station, out of company banks. The command center is located here, on the hub." She pointed, then tapped another cross-section. "This is the closest docking bay, 2 levels up. We use the AT dropship, come through here." She traced a path with the controls. "In and out, no frills. If we can hook up a relay with their system, we'd have access to their entire communications network." "You can handle that, ground leader?" Pop looked over at Jess sternly. Lara felt a wave of confusion and disbelief. What was Pop doing? Jess shot a quick glance at Lara and then shrugged. "Reckon." She found her voice and struggled to keep it calm. "I'll do it." Pop finally looked at her, and she stared at his icy blue gaze, wondering why she'd expected anything else. His lined face was a blank, but she could see anger and confusion in his eyes. "I'm communications officer," she said smoothly. "It's my job. I'll do it." Pop maintained his blank expression, but dropped his gaze back to the flat screen. "Very well," he said, and she heard nothing in his voice. He raised his head and looked at the team, Jess and Pulaski standing across from them in the tight space, Teep watching glumly from a bolted chair at one corner. "All right, ground team, get to it. Kit up and prepare to load in 20. "Yo," said Jess, and turned to the door. Teep stood up, smiling blankly, and Pulaski actually grinned at Pop as he followed him out. Lara sighed inwardly. Pop had recovered quickly, but the breach of standard procedure might as well have been a flashing sign to the team. If they didn't know before that she and Pop had something going on, they surely knew now. She wondered absently if Ellis had picked it up over the comm, and then let her anger take over, facing Pop in the quiet room. "Pop, why did you do that?" He hit the intercom switch on the flat screen, and then shook his head, staring down at his hands. "I'm sorry, Kat. Really, I just lost my head." He looked up at her, light blue eyes swimming with apology. "It won't happen again. You know I'm very fond of you, and it could be dangerous in there." His smile was pure, hesitant humility. "And I just wasn't thinking straight. I'm sorry." Lara frowned, wondering what he was thinking. She had the distinct feeling that he wasn't telling the truth and suddenly didn't know if she should pursue it or not. If he was bullshitting her, he was not a man she could trust, which meant that she should be very careful about what she said next. "I'm sorry too, Eric," she said, softly but firmly. "And I appreciate your concern, but it shouldn't interfere with our jobs. I would ultimately feel resentful towards you, and I'd much rather we be friends." She thought she saw a flash of something in his piercing blue eyes, something like pain, but it was gone before she could register it completely. Then he was smiling, the very definition of apology. "Me too, Kat," he said. He sighed and then stood up straight, abruptly back to his gruff and businesslike self. "Consider it understood, Lieutenant," he said, still smiling, and then stepped past her. He walked out of the cool briefing room, leaving the lock open behind him. Lara chewed at her lip for a moment, wondering if she had overreacted or been paranoid. She decided that it didn't matter. Her gut told her that her thoughtless affair may have started something dangerous in Eric Izzard. When they got back to base, she would turn herself in to the CO for breaking fraternization policy and get an immediate transfer. It would go on her record, but it would be a small price to pay if her intuition was correct. Until then, she'd just have to stay alert. Now, though, she had to kit her tools and suit up for combat in 15 minutes. Her stomach suddenly tightened, and she hurried out of the briefing room, thinking about how long it had been since boot camp.